3.
Hello, I'm Diane Lackey, and you are watching Polemics, the journal of the working class struggle. I'm here talking to Rich Gardner, and we're going to discuss Iran and the government possibly going to war with this country. Rich, how did you come to concern about this issue? What do you know about it? Can you share it with us?
Sure. My general view towards wars is that when I was 10 years old, it was 1970. The anti-war movement against the war in Vietnam had been going really strong, but all the people over 30 that I knew, World War II had only ended about a quarter of a century earlier. So there were lots and lots of people I knew who remembered a war that was justified. So I'm neither automatically pro nor anti-war. As far as Iran goes, when I went to college, I went to American University in Washington, D.C. There were many Iranian students attending that college. I was there in 1978. The revolution was not until the following year. So I got to hear firsthand from Iranians what their case was against the Shah. And I agreed, wow, he was a really awful ruler.
Can you share some of the points that they discussed with you?
Basically, he was just a really oppressive ruler. They related tales of people suffering torture from his group SAVAK, sort of the KGB of Iran. I found out later that the Iran was extremely corrupt. People were constantly trading policy for cash. They were constantly asking bribes from the population. This is a sign of a government in decline, of a government that is not serving the people. So I felt a good deal of sympathy. Many people felt the revolution of '79 was something that sort of burst out of nowhere, like, oh my God, who are these crazy people? And I felt, they had a reason for what they did. They had a motivation. It was not something strange or unusual to me.
I see. So how are things different now?
So now I believe our government really, really wants to launch a war on Iran. They really, really want to take over and put Americans in charge and eliminate this bothersome, annoying nation that keeps opposing what America wants to do. And I think that's an awful idea.
What do you think America wants to do?
I think America wants to take over. I think the leadership, I don't think the public of America has a strong opinion, but I think our leadership very much wants to launch a war of aggression and to take over. Would we prevail? Probably would. We probably would crush any force sent against us. We would probably be victorious. But I think the price would be very high.
Such as?
I think that if we tried, let's look at all the points of the compass. If we try to invade from Iraq, Iraq is run by a fellow named Muqtada al-Sadr. He is someone who opposed America during the Iraq War. He has been pragmatic enough, he has been sensible enough to work with America as America fights ISIS. But he is not someone who's going to give his permission for the U.S. to use Iraq as a base from which to attack Iran. If we were to attack from Saudi Arabia across the Persian Gulf, we would have to get permission from the country of Jordan to move supplies from Israel over Jordan to Saudi Arabia. We would really have to have the Saudi Arabians contribute troops in large numbers. If we were to try to go through the Strait of Hormuz to the shores of Iran on the Persian Gulf, I think that would be a real problem because Iran has had 18 years to figure out how to close off the Strait of Hormuz.
So that country would not really be unprepared. It's not going to be as easy as it might seem.
It would not be easy. If we were to invade from Afghanistan, the station Al Jazeera has a map on their website showing how much of Afghanistan the Taliban controls. The Taliban controls enough that there is no way we're going to run a supply line through that country. It's not going to happen. The remaining way of doing it would be to launch an amphibious invasion, an invasion from the sea, from the Gulf of Oman. Oman is right outside the Strait of Hormuz, and there is some shoreline on Iran that borders on that sea. That's still a long way from Tehran. Tehran is about something like 1,000 miles from that point.
So what would be the payoff for the United States to launch a war against Iran?
The payoff, the advantage of doing that would be that Iran would no longer be an annoyance. Iran would no longer be this independent anti-American nation that was running around. And, Iran does have troops in other countries. Iran has troops in Syria. Iran has, I think, some troops not really troops, but they have some influence in South America. Iran is creating trouble here and there. Saudi Arabia is accusing Iran of playing a role in the war against Yemen. So they would be.
Iran is not exactly allies with U.S. allies.
Iran, I hesitate to say Iran is an enemy, but Iran is most certainly not our friend. The nuclear deal that Barack Obama reached with Iran was done over several years. There were many, many meetings. There was a tremendous attempt to meet each other halfway. Both nations recognized that they had mutual interests, and they worked very, very hard to find, okay, here's something we can afford to give up, here's something the other side wants, and back and forth.
I see. I think oftentimes in the media, it appears that Iran is anti-U.S. and anti our administration. What do you think about that?
Well, like I said, I think I hesitate to say Iran is an enemy. I don't think they're quite that. I think there's something short of between being enemies and between being friends. I think they're sort of neutral, but on the hostile side of neutral. I think they are people that we can deal with. I think they have always been a rational set of people. Like the Soviet Union in the 1970s, when we made the SALT treaties with them, there are things where we in Iran can agree. They're also, the Soviets were not our friends during the 70s. They were clearly on the opposite side. So I think Iran is very similar to the Soviet Union during the Cold War.
Well, another war would mean more U.S. resources going toward war, more U.S. military being placed in the line of fire. So what can U.S. citizens do, and how do we get to see the plus and minus and decide that maybe we should do something to prevent this?
Basically, tell your politicians this is a bad idea. Be in touch with your congressperson, be in touch with your senator. Try to look at, gather some little bit of information and say, this is a terrible idea. One of the things about Iran is when you occupy another country, we have discovered over the years that you need a certain proportion of soldiers to civilians. The average number of soldiers per civilian, per 100 civilians, for counterinsurgency wars since World War II has been 14. For every 100 civilians, we have had 14 soldiers. What our people figure today is we can probably get away with 2.3 soldiers per 100 civilians. That means the U.S. would need 1.8 million soldiers to occupy Iran. I think if we saw draft riots during the Vietnam War, we're going to see even more during a war with Iran.
Well, put that in perspective for me. Is the U.S. occupying Afghanistan?
No, the U.S. has a small number of troops. We are trying to encourage and equip the Afghan army to hold as much territory as possible. It is losing against the Taliban. The Taliban have probably the majority of the country under their control.
And in Iran, we have the majority of the country not under our control. The country not under our control at this time.
Right. In Iraq, yes. Iraq is...
No, Iran. I'm talking about Iran.
Right. Iran is not under our control at all.
That's what I mean. So if this notion that we can come into Iran, we're talking about war. We're not talking about a cooperative relationship or some quid pro quo in this situation, correct?
Correct.
It still kind of baffles me why we would want to do that.
Like I said, this is not a popular movement. There is no pressure on the part of the American people to invade Iran.
But we're in danger of our government taking this action, even though we're not even in favor of it. We're not really thinking about it. It really doesn't mean that much to us. We're talking about bread and butter and jobs and a coming election. We're not talking about Iran. Correct?
Americans are not opposed to invading Iran as much as they are like, what? Invade Iran? Why?
Exactly. And I still have not heard what the U.S. gets out of it.
There are Congresspeople who say we've really got to take arms against them. The president has said from his very first time, the president has opposed a nuclear deal with Iran from the day that it was signed. He has opposed it all throughout, but he has yet to explain what his problem is. He has yet to come up with a really convincing explanation. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo made a lengthy speech saying why Iran was a terrible place and why we needed to launch a war against them. I was not convinced at all. I did not find his explanation to be compelling in the slightest, so I'm not sure.
So we have the question of why, and then we have the question of what can we do if we don't like this idea? Do you have any suggestions for us?
Contact your politicians. Let your congressperson know, let your senator know that you think this is a terrible idea, that this is an awful notion. Again, you might want to look into the cost of launching such a war. We have, like I said, if we launch a war against Iran, we are likely to be successful. It is likely that we will win. But we might want to look at the fact that we have occupied Iraq and Afghanistan for a long time. Neither one is a friend to the United States today. So the likelihood that Iran would end up being a friend is very low.
We have been discussing government policymakers considering invading Iran, and we are asking why. We're also asking at what cost and what can be done to prevent it. So thank you, Rich Gardner, for coming and raising those issues with us. We need to think about that and talk to our political representatives and express our views, express your view regarding peace in Iran. Welcome to Polemics, Journal of the Working Class Struggle. I'm Diane Lackey, and we will be talking to Ed Aguilar, lawyer, activist, and social change agent.
Hi, Diane. Thanks for having me.
It's great to talk to you today. You're involved in so many issues that are of importance to us. The first one that I'm very interested in is banning nuclear weapons. But before I get to those details, I'd like to ask you, how did you get involved in such important work?
Well, thank you. Yes, currently I work with the Coalition for Peace Action, but way back as a young lawyer in the 1980s, I was working for the Court of Common Pleas. And I heard about an organization called LAWS, Lawyers Alliance for World Security. And so I was curious, and I met the president of the group, and I joined up because at that time the nuclear freeze was on, if you remember. And also Ronald Reagan had been elected president. A lot of people were worried that Reagan would frankly build up the nuclear arms race. And so I got involved. I had been working on issues of criminal justice reform and civil rights and the Philadelphia prisons reform. with the Court of Common Pleas. But in my spare time, whatever spare time I had, I started working with laws. Eventually, I became the Pennsylvania chapter president of that group. This was a group that lobbied Congress for kind of a sane nuclear policy. That is, we wanted to reduce the number of nuclear weapons. We thought it was totally out of hand. The cost was out of hand. And nuclear weapons did not increase security, they reduced security. So I was lucky to get involved with laws because this was an organization that actually met, we had a national board. We actually met at Harvard University with Soviet lawyers. There was an association of Soviet lawyers who were also interested in nuclear arms reductions. And you may remember President Gorbachev had just come into power. And so we helped to lay the groundwork, among many other people, for the Reagan-Gorbachev summits, especially Reykjavik in 1987. At Reykjavik, they talked for the first time ever about reducing nuclear weapons all the way to zero, which was our goal.
So you've been involved for quite a long time.
I've been involved for a long time. Just kind of fast forwarding, we had several treaties that actually were moving the ball in the right direction.
I wanted to ask you, what are some of the achievements that you and laws actually helped bring into being?
Right, so well, in the Reagan-Gorbachev era, we had the INF Treaty. This was the treaty. They called it the Intermediate Range Nuclear Weapons Treaty. And what they did was it totally cut out nuclear weapons from Europe. And this really helped to ease the Cold War. And that laid the groundwork for a treaty called START, where they actually started reducing nuclear weapons for the first time ever. We got to a point where we had 30,000 nuclear weapons on each side, which was ridiculous. It was 10 times over you could destroy the Earth. So the trajectory started finally going down on nuclear weapons, so we felt we were making some progress. There was a long period where very little happened, and then President Obama, and President Medvedev was in office at the time, passed the New START Treaty in 2010, which actually cut nuclear weapons down to 1,500 deployed nuclear weapons each. So that was an achievement.
Now, is this down from the 30,000?
Yes.
Are we down to 1,500?
Well, 1,500 deployed. They
What does
actually
that
have
mean?
5,000 each, but deployed means, of course, that they are, on the base and ready to be fired. We would like to get down to 0 deployed and 0 in storage. Okay, that's going to take a lot of doing, but that is our goal now. And now, I guess the achievement of the whole world's nuclear policy movement
I'm still.
is the
I
nuclear
need
ban
to
treaty
picture this.
today. I'm sorry.
I need to picture 30,000 nuclear weapons each.
Yeah.
Were they on the ground and ready to be deployed, which means used?
Many of them were. They weren't all deployed, but we had thousands on submarines. We had many thousands in bases in North Dakota and that whole northern part of the country that were in underground silos.
Okay.
And we had
What
we
does
had
this cost us?
B-52 bombers. Well, the cost of nuclear weapons has actually continued even to now. Right now, we spend about $54.8 billion on nuclear weapons. So that's been part of our argument also. We need that money now to fight climate change.
Is
We
this
need
a
it.
year?
This is per year. This
Say
is
that
per
figure again for our audience.
$54.8 billion is what we spend every year, and that's an estimate. It could be higher. Just on nuclear weapons and refurbishing missiles and buying new missiles and everything having to do with the nuclear weapons program. And we would like to see that money go instead we have a proposal called Warheads to Windmills, which means move that nuclear money to fighting climate change instead. And we can talk a little more about that.
So in addition to that, you are also working on other issues. Can you tell me a little bit about those?
Yes, we also work on reducing gun violence. We have a regional headquarters in Princeton, and in the state of New Jersey, we have helped to pass 8 different gun violence reduction programs, ranging from universal background checks to, stopping assault weapons, banning assault weapons, and getting rid of, high-capacity magazines, and basically making things safer for Americans about guns. Unfortunately, Pennsylvania, as you know, on a statewide basis, is a more conservative state and has not passed these things. But in 2018, on the federal level, as you know, the House of Representatives went through a major change. The Democrats became the majority, and 5 different suburban districts in Philadelphia, 4 women, by the way, all women around Philadelphia, and 1 man in the Pittsburgh area, switched from Republican to Democratic, and all 4 of our suburban women in Philadelphia, and we actually campaigned for Chrissy Houlihan in Chester and Reading and Westchester, and she won by a significant margin what had been a Republican seat, and one of her top issues is reducing gun violence.
And have you worked at all with City Council around this issue?
Yes, I'm glad you mentioned that. On the nuclear issue, we've worked in Philadelphia. Councilwoman Helen Gim was instrumental in getting a resolution before City Council, which they passed unanimously. We were there in the audience, and they passed it unanimously in support of the Nuclear Ban Treaty. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about the Nuclear Ban Treaty, if I may.
Please.
The Nuclear Ban Treaty has been passed at the UN in New York in 2017 by 122 nations, representing 70% of the people of the earth. Okay, so that's better than a 2/3 majority. In Congress, you need a 2/3 majority for important things. Well, we've already got it on a worldwide basis, but the bad news is under President Trump, the U.S. refused to even attend the conference, let alone negotiate the treaty. But once that treaty is ratified by 50 plus countries, it will actually become a tentative international law. That will increase the pressure on the U.S. and Russia and others who still have the nuclear weapons.
Now, do you know other countries? Can you tell us other countries that currently have nuclear weapons?
Well, yes, we actually have all of the P5, that is the permanent members of the UN Security Council, unfortunately all have nuclear weapons. So that's China, Russia, the US, France, and Great Britain, or the United Kingdom. Also, Israel has nuclear weapons, even though they've never officially admitted it. Pakistan and India have nuclear weapons, most recently North Korea. And of course, Iran, on Iran, that was another achievement of the Obama administration to negotiate a deal where Iran agreed never to have nuclear weapons, but then that deal was canceled by President Trump, and Iran has since started to backtrack. So that is another touchy area, but part of our goal as peacemakers is no war with Iran and no war with Korea. Rather, we would like to see an end to the Korean War. You know, the Korean War happened 70 years ago and has never officially ended. We would like to see a real peace treaty, and both the president of South Korea and North Korea would like to sign that treaty. Only the U.S. is standing in the way.
Hi, I'm Angela Vogel, and you're watching Polemics, Journal of a Working Class Struggle. We'll be right back.